Hi everyone, it's Laura here for ModaScrap, and in today's video I'm going to share with you how to create a dreamcatcher with the feathers stamp set and how to turn it into a home decor piece. Let's start by taking a look at the products that I'll be using today. I have the feathers stamp set by ModaScrap and I'll be using that to create the feathers on my dreamcatcher. I will be using the Sentiment Make-A-Wish from the Forever Green stamp set. This was released with the latest Christmas release by ModaScrap. For the ring of the dreamcatcher, I'm going to use the Dashing Circles, and then I'm also going to use the Happy Frame die by ModaScrap to create the frame for my home decor piece. I'm going to play around with stencils a little bit. I'm going to use the feathers on the Friend stencil and the stars on the New Baby stencil. For the hoop of my dreamcatcher and for the frame of the final home decor piece, I'm going to use papers from this beautiful paper pad. It's called Wood Effect and I'll use the 12 by 12 version. And then to add a little bit of texture and shimmer and shine, I'm going to use Fluffy in the color Brilliant White and Sunshine, and also the clear jelly. Alright, so we can move on to the tutorial, and I started by creating a galaxy background on a large sheet of watercolor cardstock. This measures roughly 10 3/4 by 7 3/4 inches. I wanted a larger piece that gave me enough space for my dreamcatcher. And I'm starting by blending Distress Oxides pretty much in spots all around the panel. I used picked raspberry, wilted violet, cracked pistachio and peacock feathers. And if this is the first time you watch a galaxy background tutorial, I do know that this doesn't look very artistic or very pretty at all at this stage, but it's always the case with galaxy backgrounds. They don't look like much until the very end, so bear with me and we'll get a nice piece at the end of this tutorial. So once I was done adding these colorful areas to the background, I moved on and started blending Distress Oxide in the color Blueprint Sketch in the areas that were left white. At this point, as you can see, I'm not worrying at all about blending my inks together. I'm just basically covering the surface, and then I'm going to do the same with Distress Oxide in the color Black Soot. So I'm bringing in a little bit of black to make this look like a nice night sky or like the universe. I'm using some foam blenders to blend my inks, and again at this stage I'm just adding down color, and I can do this because Distress Oxides are really creamy and they blend really nicely with each other, so once I come in with the next layers I'm going to get a smooth blend, even if right now this doesn't look very blended at all. Once I was satisfied with the amount of black I put down on my background, it was time to start doing some actual ink blending between the colors. So I went over those areas with Distress Oxide in Blueprint Sketch so that I could get a nice blend between my blue and my black on my background sky. As you can see, I'm also going back in with my Distress Oxide in Black Soot, so I'm going back and forth between the two colors until I get a nice and smooth blend. The next step was to blend the colorful areas into the sky, so I went back with my Distress Oxides in the colors that I picked earlier, so peacock feathers, cracked pistachio, picked raspberry and wilted violet, and I started doing some ink blending, bringing out those colors towards the sky, and at the same time with my Blueprint Sketch I'm going to go over the transition areas to create this nice gradient. I repeated that for all the colorful areas. I didn't think you needed to see that for the entire background, and then I decided to darken up the edges of the panel with Distress Oxide in Black Soot to give this more the appearance of a night sky. At this point the ink blending is done and this is the result. I know it still doesn't look that great, but trust me, once we add the stars it will all come together. To add a little bit of shine to the stars, I decided to use my Gansai Tambi Starry colors. I activated them with water and then I picked up the pigments with a small paintbrush and created my stars by flicking the paintbrush all over the background. I'm using different colors of my Gansai Tambi Starry watercolors, and I'm also rotating the panel while I create the flicks, because this will give a real random appearance to the stars, because there isn't just one direction in which the droplets are created. Here is the nice shine you get when you use these watercolors, and then to add even more texture and even more sparkle, I decided to add the fluffy in the color Brilliant White. So I picked up way too much, to be honest, with my paintbrush. I diluted it with some water, and again I flicked it over the panel. Because this is a texture paste, it will create more dimensional droplets compared to watercolors, depending on how much you dilute it, and also it has glitter in it, so it will help create more sparkle on this pretty galaxy background. It was then time to move on and start working on the dreamcatcher. To create the hoop, I used 2 dies from the Dashing Circles set by ModaScrap. These are the second and third largest die in the set, and I'm cutting one of the papers in the Wood Effect 12x12 paper pad, also by ModaScrap. I am taping my dies together using some purple tape because I want to die cut not only this pattern paper but also some craft cardstock, because I want to layer these die cuts together to create a little bit more dimension on my dreamcatcher, and by having my dies taped I'm sure that all the frames will be the same so that I can layer them and the layering will be perfect. To glue them together, I'm using some Nuvo Deluxe adhesive because, as always, when you use liquid glue, you have that little bit of wiggle time to glue everything in place and make sure that everything is nice and precise. The last layer will be the pattern paper so that the hoop on the dreamcatcher will have this beautiful wood effect. I'm running my fingers along the hoop to make sure that there is no excess glue oozing out, and also to make sure that all the layers are nicely stacked on top of each other, and then I can move on and start working on the woven part of the dreamcatcher. Now, you could totally do this with embroidery floss. There are a lot of tutorials on the web, but I thought I'd make my life a little bit easier and cheat, quote unquote, a little bit. So what I did is I used my white gel pen directly on my galaxy background. I took the larger die that I used to create my dreamcatcher, and I used a white gel pen to trace the inside portion of the die. You want to trace the inside portion because this way you'll be sure that once you glue your die cut hoop on top of the background, this trace, this guide that we created for ourselves will be completely hidden. I then used a T-square ruler to mark the center of this circle. I eyeballed it, so it's not 100% precise, but it was good enough. And then I started adding some small dots on the perimeter of the circle, first basically dividing it in half, now in quarters, and then I'm going to basically end up with my circle divided in eighths. Again, I'm eyeballing everything. As I said, it doesn't have to be 100% precise, but these dots that I'm creating will be the guides that I'm going to use to create the woven pattern. So to do that, what I did is I took the largest die in the Dashing Circles set, and I'm going to basically use it to join the dots that I have on the perimeter of the circle with the center. I'm using a white gel pen because this will look like it's white thread, and I'm going to basically repeat this step, going all around the circle, creating these curves that join the dots that I have on the perimeter with the dot in the center. The process was pretty fast and really easy, much easier for me at least than using thread. Of course you can go that way, it's going to add some beautiful texture to your project, but I wanted to also show you an alternative in case you don't have the time or the desire to work with floss. I kept going around my circle until I completed the pattern, and at this point I decided that it was a little bit empty. So what I did is I basically marked more dots on the perimeter in between the ones that I had already, so dividing each free section in half and creating these kind of petal-like shapes again, using the die in the Dashing Circles set by ModaScrap. The pen that I'm using is a Sakura Jelly Roll pen in the size 10, so it's a nice and thick line that stands out nicely against my background. And here it's how it looks once we add the hoop. I think it's coming together pretty nicely, and the galaxy background makes more and more sense the more we add elements on top of it. Next, it was time to work on the feathers for my dreamcatcher, and for that I'm using the Feathers stamp set by ModaScrap. I'm stamping them with Versa Fine Clear Nocturne ink on some watercolor cardstock, and then instead of coloring them or watercoloring them, I decided to use the Friend STENCIL by ModaScrap. This has two feathers that overlap perfectly with the ones in the Feathers stamp set, so I decided to use my distress inks and to do some ink blending using Stormy Sky and Mild Lavender, so that I have a nice and cool palette on the feathers, which I thought would look great against my galaxy background. The stencil has patterns that fit both feathers, so I went ahead and ink blended them all using the same colors. Again, those are Stormy Sky and Mild Lavender. And then, in order to add a little bit of gloss, I am coating everything with the ModaScrap jelly. This is the transparent one. I cut apart all the feathers, and then I'm going to use the stencil and a spatula to apply the jelly over the images. It would be best if you did this at the start of the whole process, so that by the time you're done with your galaxy background, your jelly is completely dry. It didn't take very much, so I didn't have to wait like overnight or anything like that, but still, it's nice if you reduce waiting time when you're crafting. Once the jelly was completely dry, I used my scissors to cut out all the feathers, and I'm leaving a white border all around so that it looks as if they were die cut. I used again my Sakura number 10 Jelly Roll pen to draw in some threads hanging from the hoop, and that will be connecting the feathers to the hoop itself. I'm not drawing them straight down, but I am curving them a little bit so that I create a bit of movement on the design. And then I can go ahead and adhere my dreamcatcher. I'm overlapping the hoop with that woven pattern that we drew in a little while ago, and then I can go ahead and adhere the feathers too. I'm using Nuvo Deluxe adhesive to glue everything down, and I'm going to have the two smaller and identical feathers on the sides of the dreamcatcher and this longer one in the center. To embellish the piece a little bit more, I am adding some pearls of different sizes to the ends of the feathers. That part there where the feather meets the thread is not really neat and clean, and so by adding these pearls we not only create an extra layer of embellishment, if you will, but we also hide those untidy spots. The next step was to create a frame so that I can turn my background into a home decor piece, and for that I'm going to use the ModaScrap Happy Frame die and another of the designs from the Wood Effect pattern paper. I'm trimming the paper into 4 different strips that are more or less the width of my die, and each of them will be one of the sides of the frame. And then, because the height of my background is actually larger than the length of these dies, I'm going to have to do some partial die cutting. So you can see that I have part of the die hanging off of my cutting plates, and this way the edge that is sticking out will not be cut. I can then remove the die from the paper, and then I'm going to position it along the cut lines that I did. Again, using my tape to secure the die in place, making sure that it overlaps slightly with the part that's already cut. And again, I'm going to do some more partial die cutting, this time having the other end sticking out of my cutting plates. I'm running everything through my die cutting machine, and as you can see, we obtained a larger strip at this point that will fit the size of our background. I repeated this for all 4 sides, and I make sure that these pieces were considerably larger than the background because I preferred to have larger strips to trim down later to the size I needed rather than doing all the die cutting and figuring out that my frame was too small for my background. I'm not going to go into detail about how to assemble the frame. There is another video that I shared and I will have a link to it in the description box down below in case you're interested. But very briefly, you're going to fold the paper along the score lines that are created by the die, and then you're going to tape or glue the two opposite sides with each other in the way that I'm showing on screen, and this way you're going to create your 3D sides for your frame. You're going to repeat this for all sides, and this is the final result after you glue the sides together. I think it looks absolutely stunning, especially with this wood grain effect. At this point, you could go ahead, glue the frame onto your background and be done with it, and you'll have a beautiful project. But I decided to take it a step forward and to add a greeting. This is the Make-A-Wish sentiment from the Forever Green stamp set by ModaScrap, which I embossed with wet embossing powder on the lower right portion of the background. And then I decided to add a few 3D stars using the new baby STENCIL and the ModaScrap Fluffy in the color Sunshine. I am using a plastic palette knife to apply my fluffy through the STENCIL, and I'm going to add the stars in different parts of my background and around my sentiment too to frame it a little bit. Next, I trimmed down some heavyweight white cardstock to roughly 10 3/4 by 8 inches. I coated it with quite a bit of strong tape, and I'm going to adhere my background on top. The only reason why I'm doing this is that there was a little bit of warping that was created by my heat embossing, so I wanted to make sure that the background laid flat. And lastly, we can go ahead and adhere the frame on our background and complete this beautiful home decor piece. Here you can see the final result. It is a little bit outside my comfort zone style-wise, but I really love the way it turned out. I love the style of these feathers and of the sentiment font, and I love all the shimmer from the jelly and the stars on the background. And that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I inspired you to create your own dream catchers with the ModaScrap feathers and the dashing circles. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more card making and paper crafting inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by, and have a great day.